Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk to you about Chapter 9 of the book The Coddling of the American Mind, which is the decline of play. With you, Santiago, and who is speaking to you, Juliana. So, let's start.
Okay, so when we were talking about brain develop, sometimes we tend to think that it is also something that is social, or let's say that is social construct. But this is also something genetic. So genes in brain develop. As you can notice, first draft, or let's say that this process of when we are creating ourselves in the utero, is sometimes not just, let's say, not just conditioned, but sometimes these genes and, well, all the anatomical process inside and actually is permeating what we call the brain develop, actually how we can socialize. Sometimes our personality is about genes is in the brain develop because it is also, let's say, anatomical. Okay, but let's say that experiences matter too. Okay, not everything is about genes or let's say anatomical things. Okay, so those experiences are important in the process of free play because this play means that you need to interact with another people. So in this process of interacting with another people, you got some experiences that, of course, develop your brain and how you can socialize. Sometimes how it conditionate the way how we see the reality and we how sometimes actually we tend to play. Okay, and let's talk about the linguistical brain process developing. How sometimes this process of language, not only as a social construction, but actually as something individually that you can create and that you have as a skill, is expecting to create some nets of interaction. Again, not only in terms of socialization in groups, actually sometimes how you can condition the way how you talk or how you interact with the process of language and how it is directly related with brain developing. So, for example, you need reciprocal exchanges. I'm sorry, with other people. Yes, and also the play is a process to interact and to exchange experiences, gens sometimes, and the process of the language.
So, to better understand what Santiago has just explained to us, we are going to start by explaining what free play is. So, according to Peter Ray, a leading researcher of play defines it as an activity that is performed for the sole purpose of the activity itself, where the children themselves are in charge of choosing and directing it freely. So, we can say that a soccer game or a piano class wouldn't be in the category of free play as it is conditioned by specific purposes and defined rules. So, Gray and other researchers know that all play is not equal. According to them, it can be said that there is a kind of vigorous physical free play, which is done in the company of other children and mostly without an adult supervision, which is the favorite of them and the most beneficial because represents like an important part of their development since somehow their brain is waiting for this type or kind of stimulations. So, as I just mentioned, despite the fact that free play is mostly carried out without an adult, it is important to highlight that in some way children have the ability to introduce levels of risk and danger in a moderate way, such as when they climb walls and trees or skateboard down staircases. And really, it is as if they learned to deal with the physical and emotional challenges of the play situations that they themselves generate. So now we are going to talk about how in recent years the trend towards free play has decreased in American children. A study conducted by sociologists at the University of Michigan, which consisted of asking parents to keep track of what their children did in their free time in 1981 and then repeating the exercise with parents in 1997, revealed that overall play had decreased by 16%, replaced by indoors activities involving computers and without the company of more children, which are activities that doesn't build physical strength and is not as effective at building psychological resilience or social competence. Taking into account the years in which it was carried out, it is important to mention that these belong to the Generation X and the generation of millennials. Although it's true that this research took into account two generations, let's talk a little about the iGen or Generation Z. They have been systematically deprived of opportunities to dose themselves with risks instead of enjoying a healthy amount of it. This generation is more likely than early ones to avoid it. This produced by overexposure to hyperconnectivity and by the contextual environment in which they grow up, where they interact mostly with a screen and not with the real social environment. This can make them more risk averse, seeing daily life tasks beyond their capacity, where anything can be a risk. On the other hand, the same study carried out by these academics showed that there was also an increase in the time that children must spend in school, as well as the increase in homework, creating more academic load and leaving aside the time that children should have for their personal development. Likewise, the fear introduced by the media about kidnapping and violence has influenced the parents of these children, who confess the excessive fear they have for their children's safety, creating a feeling of safety concerns or safetyism that was something that we already saw on the class and in the presentations. These two points can explain why free play has decreased in North American children, but it is not the only one. There is also the college admission process, and Professor Santiago is going to talk a little about it.
Okay, so let's talk about the next statement, that is the childhood as test preparation. But it has, let's say, these questions to guide us. Okay, so the question is, are your children prepared for first grade? In the next slide, you will see 12 different items are actually steps uh, as a question that you need to follow and to understand as well, to look for a possible answer of it. But let's talk about those different items, not in terms of specifically, but actually something as general, and is that, for example, kindergarten classroom would have been organized to build social relationship and facilitate hands-up exploration. That is important, because again, let's remember that we are talking about brain develop, and remember that it is also not something social. It could be something related with genes. It could be also something as a individual process. And well, let's say that this childhood, in the play, in the preparation to go into the school, are developing those statements. Okay, so let's look the 12 steps. So think about this. I'm not gonna read the 12 because of course there's not enough time, and actually that is not the purpose of this presentation, but you can pause the video and then you can look for, well, each one's. But let's say that those items, or let's say that those questions could be generate something as specific actions to develop brain process. For example, you can identify and write numbers to 100. You can count by tens to 100, or actually by 20s or fifth, well, something like this. And you can read all kindergarten level 6 words, or be able to read books with 5 to 10 words per page. Okay, there is a specific way, again, to develop the brain process, and again with those statements that I have tell you. And the last one is, well, like I said, that form complete sentences or per paper using phonetic spelling. Let's say that this journal and stories writing also could be useful, because sometimes, let's say that this phonetic spelling is not as important as we think to is, or as actually it is, and we tend to exclude it. And again, remember that it is an individual, social, and anatomical process.
Taking into account what Santiago explained to us, we are going to talk about what may be producing this change of thought. So, in recent years, it has become more difficult to enter the most prestigious universities in the United States, which is why parents have been more concerned about building their children's resumes so they can be accepted in said universities. Is what Yale English professor William Derevich calls the resume arms race, which generates high levels of stress and risk of suicide by generating pressure on students about their grades and academic performance, creating a sense of like catastrophizing ideas or situations. Now I would like to read a few words from Professor William and the expert Peter. So the first phrase is the only point of having more is having more than everyone else. And the second one is students are prepared academically, but they are not prepared to deal with day-to-day life. So this is how children are growing up under the highest levels of academic pressure and competitiveness, which doesn't allow them to grow up and develop skills for life in society and for real life. So Santiago will tell us a little more about it.
Okay, so let's continue with this childhood as democracy preparation. This step, or let's relate this concept with this specific concept of art of association, that is, in summary, the deprivation and over supervision that is rising in college, but of course at universities, at schools, and actually at homes. We are creating, let's say, difficult feedbacks, and we are creating a culture where childhood or children are expecting the best feedback possible. And if you remember the, well, all the things that we have been talking in the presentation, feedback is also good in terms of, let's say, brain develop, but it could be also something social, individual, and genetic. So this art of association, we can see, let's say, a good example of it. That is the grades trauma. Sometimes we think that we need to get the best grade, and it is a trauma for us. But we are not showing that we can have, actually, that we need to get this grade. But for example, in universities, that is also that happen. Sometimes people is hitting their heads because they think that for example, three is not enough to pass, but actually that is enough. That is actually the purpose of the three. That is the minimum limit, but that is, let's say, this boundary about. So what you need to do is that you have to demonstrate that you can have or that you can get this good, let's say, grade. But the trauma is not here. It's actually not in the grade. It's actually because we are expecting that we need to get uh, let's say, a good grade, more than four, but we are not demonstrating anything. So this feedback, sometimes the bad feedback is bad for us, or we take it as bad because we think that is not enough in terms of grade, and we're having traumas about it, in summary, right?
So finally, it is important to take into account some key points that we present to have clarity on the subject. So, okay, it is important to know that like mammals, children need of free play, which will help them to develop emotional, social, and physical skills. Otherwise, they may have problems managing their emotions and be more averse to risks. On the other hand, understanding that the decrease can be explained by the fear spread by the media, the competition to enter universities, a growing emphasis on test preparation and homework, and a corresponding emphasis on physical and social skills. Also, smart devices and social networks have contributed to making this much worse. All of the mentioned can have implication in the way in which children and young people relate to their social environment by not generating cooperation and conflict resolution skills, which makes them more reactive to any type of situations that requires them. So this would be all. Thanks for watching and for your attention, and have a nice rest of weekend. See you later.